Would you believe me if I said that there was an author out there who was trying to summarize all of human knowledge into one coherent theory? And would you believe me if I said he's actually doing an extremely good job and has been doing for decades on exactly that premise and exactly that journey? Because that's what today's book is going to be about. It's understanding what is referred to as integral theory, just to introduce this brand new idea maybe to some people at this point who have never come across an idea like this before, about how is biology related to chemistry, related to physics, related to spirituality, related to the systems around us, related to who we are and self-identity, and everything else in between. How is all this related to philosophy and the development of humanity over at least, let's say, 2,000 years of written history? That's what a book that I'm recommending today is all going to be based on. But there's going to be two reasons why I'm recommending this book, and you'll see the first reason why. So a book that I recommended earlier in this series is this one. This was Pleasure by Alexander Lowen. That's very much like the standard book size that I'm referring to. It's roughly 250 to 300 pages. Today's book, for example, in comparison, is this absolute monster. It's just shy of 900 pages. And that's exactly why I'm recommending this. Because straight away, when I thought at the start of my reading journey, a book like this would have just been absolutely impossible. Not based on anything that it says inside, but just the size of it alone would put me off. Because I'd be thinking, when am I ever going to have time to read something like this? How am I going to understand everything that's inside there? What else could I be reading instead of this book? And so on. I'd have come up with a lot of reasons as to why I shouldn't even tackle a book which is, off the top of my head, roughly 850 pages. But I was just there starting to limit myself. I was starting to doubt myself. I was coming to conclusions before I'd even started a book like this. So that's the main reason why I'm recommending such an enormous book on a channel like this, is to get through those obstacles, is to realize, first of all, where is your self-esteem? Is it lower than you realized? Because that's exactly what it was for me when I came to reading something like this. It was, who am I to be able to attempt a book like this? How am I ever going to find time in my life? But then, linking back to other videos in this series, I'd look at my screen time and I could easily save over 2 hours per day, every single day, just by cutting out nonsense, by watching pointless YouTube videos, by watching pointless Instagram videos, or just scrolling for the sake of it. So if I'm looking at a book that's of something like this size, suddenly I've got 14 hours extra per week. Even if I don't read that in the space of a week or 2 weeks, that's fine. But across a month, if I've got an extra 28 hours, or like much more than that still, it's going to be more like 56 if I can save 2 per day, then what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be finding time to be able to dedicate a bit of studying for this. And that's what this is. So the book recommendation for today, I'm guessing a lot of people have read this as it's been on the screen, is Sex, Ecology and Spirituality by Ken Wilber. So the first reason why I'm recommending this book is because, first of all, I had all kinds of blocks around certain types of books which were suitable for me and not suitable for me. And first of all, I wanted that to be acknowledged in a video like this, because you might have the same thought. Why on earth would I recommend, how on earth would I be expected to read a book of this size? He has considerable other books. You can go through a lot of them. Some of them as short as 200 pages. Some of them, like I say, going through like the 700 plus kind of level. But the idea is, it's just understanding what type of person you are to be able to tackle an obstacle like this. But to talk about the actual topic of this book itself, this is quite hard to really summarize down, because like you've heard from the start of this video, it's going over literally everything. It's trying to weave together all the different threads of all the different developments of humanity in all different thoughts. So I want to make it just really clear into a really specific way of how it's helped me, and how it's helped to give me a structure to how I can see the world and myself within it as well. So if I go back to my earlier life, let's say whether it was a child, a teenager or a young man, anxiety was absolutely a key defining point of my life. For 22, maybe 25 years, almost all of my decisions were made around the fact that I was not only anxious, but I identified as an anxious man or an anxious boy. So in that case there, I'm focusing entirely on just one aspect of myself. I'm thinking of what's it like to be inside my own head experiencing anxiety. But if I put all the emphasis there, I'm not doing the idea of anxiety justice. I'm not doing myself justice. I need to think about what's going on in a bigger sense as to what's keeping that anxiety going. And that's one of the amazing ideas in this book. It's referred to as all quadrants and all levels, or all lines. AQAL is how it's shortened down. So when I think about myself as an anxious person, let's say I step back into the shoes of my 20-year-old self, I know what it's like to be an anxious person from the inside of my head. But I also need to consider, what's my body doing when I'm feeling anxious? What food am I putting into my body that might be making that situation worse? What am I doing in terms of sleep? What am I doing in terms of my habits to be able to contribute to that anxiety? But I also need to consider as well where I've come from. How do my family experience anxiety? When they hear that word, what do they do or what do they not do? In a cultural sense, when we use the word anxiety, what does that mean? I was raised on a council estate in the north of the UK. Anxiety for me, based on that upbringing alone, is going to be very, very different to someone who was born and raised in a upper middle class family, for example. Anxiety itself, though, is understood differently from a cultural perspective. But then also what's happening in a bigger, wider perspective. What are the systems that are happening in the UK? That's where I'm living now. That's where I've lived my entire life. What are the systems that are in place that's actually keeping anxiety going or that's promoting anxiety, whether that is understood and is explicit or whether it's implicit, whether it's accidental or whether it's intentional? When I think about myself as an anxious man, if I was to label myself in that way, if I go back to my 20-year-old self, I've got to consider all four of these quadrants. I've got to be able to think about it from the perspective of what does it mean for, in the sense of I, when I say I'm an anxious man. What does it mean to have an anxious body? Like what's the it part of me doing if I reduce myself down to like the mechanics of what's going on? When I say, oh, we come from an anxious family, what am I saying there about we in my family? What am I saying culturally about this? And then what am I saying in a broader sense about the UK in the 90s, 2000s, 2010 to now 2020s? What am I saying about anxiety and what it is to be anxious in a world like that? All of those combined, when it's not possible to reduce the idea of anxiety down to just any one of those quadrants, it's understanding that it's going to be a dynamic interplay between each of these things. And as a result, then we can start to push into very, very specific areas and also highlight very, very specific goals and also solutions to those goals as well. I can start to identify which parts of my personality need to be developed and which parts need to be maybe put on the back burner just for a second while other parts of my personality are able to come through. If I put all of my focus just on what it is to be anxious myself and to be able to focus just on my family, but I completely ignore nutrition and sleep, for example, or fitness, then I'm never really going to be able to solve that issue overall. That's just one thing that one of many, many, many things I've taken from a book like this, which is trying to understand and reclaim that nuance. It's trying to understand myself in as many different areas as possible, because that's the only way that I'm going to be able to get a true answer, a deeper answer. I don't just want the span of all these different ideas. I don't just want the horizontal, flat version of what I could do. I don't want just a load of tips and tricks online about what I might be able to do to feel less anxious. I want the depth of this. I want to understand what it feels like in a deeper way to be anxious, and also where can that take me as well. I don't just want ideas on this very flat surface. I want to be able to experience the full breadth and depth of what it is to be a human. How I can overcome that, and also how I can actually use that to spur me on for further missions in the future. It calls into question so many different things, and that's what an absolute monster of a book like this is going to be doing. If it's going to be combining, even just on a basic level, science and spirituality, we're starting to bring together and bridge together two ideas that might have previously been inseparable. When I think about, for example, just to stick with that one example, anxiety, I need to consider what is the truth of the matter. And then as a result, I can go online and have a look at what other people are saying about anxiety and how to manage it. But I also need to question the truthfulness of the person writing that, or the truthfulness of the person saying that if I speak to them in person. Already there's a nuance that's starting to be developed there. Truth versus truthfulness. We've started to talk about this idea of span versus depth. We've started to look at this idea of different quadrants. Who is it that I am? What's my body doing? What is my culture? What does that come from? And what is the system that I'm living in at this point in time? You can really start to see how, just in a really basic way, we're starting to pick apart pretty fundamental concepts. And then from there, it then becomes, how do we then integrate them all together? That's what integral psychology or integral theory is about on a bigger scale. It's how do we look at the most healthy, fully formed, mature aspects of each of these different ideas, see what they've all got in common, and then to focus on that. To be able to look at all the different religions, see what they all agree on, and then to be able to think, okay, where is the truth in all this? What can I align myself to? Rather than just settling and focusing on the differences and just creating enemies just for the sake of it by disagreeing on very, very specific circumstances and ideas. I want to see what we've got in common. I want to see what all the psychologists have got in common and all these different lines of development have got in common. I want to have a look at that in terms of religion. I want to look at it in terms of culture. I want to look at it in terms of language. That's what all this is. And that's why the subtitle of this is The Spirit of Evolution. You're going to be evolving. It's just, who are you in that process as you are evolving? This book it's about 850 pages, and at least 200 of those pages are just footnotes and references and notes and explanations about certain different ideas. So not only is it just a massive book to begin with, but if you're a bit more on that academic or scholarly bent, then you can actually get a lot of ideas in terms of the bibliography. And that's also how I'm trying to build out this library, looking at book recommendations from other book recommendations. And that is a library in and of itself. So that is just one of many, many, many books I will come to recommend to do with integral theory. But try sitting down for a month and tackle an absolute monster of a book like Sex, Ecology and Spirituality, if you're brave enough to do so.